Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The shackles were not made of cold iron, but of warm, pulsating gold, yet they held him just as tightly against the velvet headboard. You promised. The voice was a low rumble, vibrating against the shell of Julian's ear, terrifyingly gentle. You promised you would never leave me, teacher. Julian Vane stared up at the canopy of the imperial bed, his breath hitching in a throat that felt too tight. He couldn't look down. He couldn't bear to see the face of the monster he had created. In the candlelight, the gold chains clinked softly, a sickeningly domestic sound amidst the sheer terror of the situation. This wasn't supposed to happen. The novel was supposed to end with the tyrant emperor conquering the north, marrying the saintess, and forgetting all about his insignificant, sickly tutor. Julian was supposed to be retired in a cottage by the sea, sipping tea and congratulating himself on a job well done. Instead, the emperor, Cassian Thorne, was currently straddling Julian's waist, his eyes burning with a madness that eclipsed the original villain's bloodlust. "Look at me," Cassian commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper that carried the weight of a death sentence. Julian turned his head. He saw the face of the boy he had raised, the boy he had shielded from whips and starvation. But the boy was gone. In his place was a man with shoulders broad enough to carry an empire and eyes like fractured obsidian, dark, sharp, and reflecting only one thing: Julian. "I didn't leave," Julian rasped, his voice trembling. I retired. You were grown. You didn't need me anymore." Cassian laughed, a dark, fractured sound that sent a shiver down Julian's spine. He leaned down, his lips brushing against Julian's pulse point, feeling the frantic flutter of fear beneath the skin. "That is where you were wrong, Julian. I never needed the throne. I never needed the empire. I only ever needed you. And now that I have retrieved you from that hovel you try to hide in, I will make sure you understand that escape is not a concept that applies to us." To understand how the world had narrowed down to the gold chains of an imperial bedchamber, one had to go back 10 years. Julian had woken up in the body of a minor villain, the abusive tutor of the future Mad Emperor, Cassian Thorne. In the original text, The Crown of Ashes, the tutor was a sadistic man who beat the young, illegitimate prince, cementing Cassian's hatred for humanity. Cassian eventually snapped, killed the tutor, burned the palace, and launched a reign of terror that bathed the continent in blood. Julian, a 24-year-old literature student from modern London, had panicked. He didn't want to die. He certainly didn't want to abuse a child. He remembered the first time he saw Cassian. The boy was 12, skinny, kneeling in the snow of the courtyard as punishment for a spill he hadn't caused. His hands were blue with cold, his eyes already dead. Julian had rushed out, not thinking of the plot, not thinking of the consequences. He had wrapped his own fur cloak around the shivering boy. "Get up," Julian had said, his voice softer than the character was ever supposed to be. "You'll catch your death." Cassian had flinched, expecting a blow. When Julian's warm hands chafed heat back into his frozen fingers, the boy looked at him with an expression Julian had misinterpreted for years. He thought it was gratitude. He thought it was confusion. He didn't realize it was the birth of an obsession. For 7 years, Julian rewrote the narrative. He intercepted the poisoned soup sent by the Empress. He took the whippings intended for the young prince, claiming negligence on his own part. He taught Cassian not just history and swordsmanship, but empathy. He read poetry to him by the fireplace. He held him when the nightmares of his mother's death woke him screaming. "You don't have to be what they say you are," Julian would whisper, smoothing the damp hair back from the boy's forehead. "You can be good, Cassian. You can be kind." "Kind," Cassian would repeat, his gaze intense, fixed solely on Julian's face. "Like you, better than me." "No," Cassian would say, clutching Julian's sleeve with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "There is nothing better than you. You are my world, Julian. My only world." Julian had smiled then, thinking it was just childhood attachment. A duckling imprinting on its mother. He assumed that once Cassian hit puberty, discovered girls, and began his ascent to power, the attachment would fade. The saintess, the female lead, would appear, and Julian would fade into the background. That was the plan. It was a logical, sensible plan. But logic has no place in the mind of a psycho, even one raised with kindness. The deviation began subtly. When Cashin was 16, a stable boy had insulted Julian. The next day, the stable boy vanished. When Julian asked, Cashin merely smiled, a beatific, innocent smile, and said the boy had been sent to a better post in the countryside. Julian believed him. Why wouldn't he? He had raised Cashin to be just. Then came the debutante ball. Cashin, 18 and strikingly handsome, was surrounded by eligible heiresses, including the saintess, Lady Alara. Julian watched from the balcony, a proud parent sipping champagne. He waited for the spark, the fateful meeting. Instead, Cashin ignored Alara completely. He stormed up the stairs, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto Julian. He marched over, scattering dukes and duchesses like dry leaves. "Why are you standing here?" Cashin demanded, his voice tight. "I'm watching you, Your Highness. You should be dancing with Lady Alara. She's looking at you." "I don't want her to look at me," Cashin hissed, stepping into Julian's personal space, radiating heat and agitation. "I hate it when they look at me. I only want you to look at me. Dance with me." "I cannot," Julian whispered, scandalized. "I am your tutor. Two men cannot. I am the crown prince." Cashin roared, silencing the ballroom. The music stopped. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Cashin didn't care. He grabbed Julian's hand, pressing it to his chest, right over his frantically beating heart. "If I say we dance, we dance." Julian had managed to diffuse the situation, laughing it off as the prince being drunk, dragging Cashin away. But that night, in the safety of the prince's chambers, the dynamic shifted. Cashin had pinned Julian against the wall, not violently, but with a heaviness that trapped him. "You are planning to leave?" Cashin accused. It wasn't a question. "You are of age, Cashin. My duty is done." "Your duty?" Cashin's eyes darkened. "Is that all this is to you? Duty?" "It is my job," Julian lied, trying to create distance. "I was paid to raise you." "Then I will pay you," Cashin said, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. "I will pay you in gold, in land, and blood. Name your price, Julian. But do not talk of leaving. If you leave..." He trailed off, his hand coming up to caress Julian's cheek, his thumb tracing the line of his lower lip. "If you leave, I will burn this kingdom to the ground until I find you under the ashes." Julian had shivered. He thought it was hyperbole, a teenager's dramatic flair. He was wrong. 2 years later, the war for succession began. The emperor died. The brothers turned on each other. It was the moment Julian had been waiting for. According to the plot, Cashin had to go to the northern border to secure the loyalty of the Frost Legions. It would take 6 months. "I will return for you," Cashin had sworn, clad in black armor, looking every inch the god of war. He kissed Julian, a searing, desperate kiss that tasted of iron and salt. "Wait for me here. Do not step foot outside the palace walls." "I will be here," Julian lied. The moment Cashin's legion vanished over the horizon, Julian enacted his escape. He had saved money. He had forged papers under the name Julian Blackwood. He bribed a carriage driver. He staged a scene at the riverside, a torn cloak, a shoe left in the mud, to imply he had fallen in and drowned. He fled to a coastal village in the neighboring kingdom of O'Day. He bought a small bookshop. He grew a beard. He lived in peace for 3 years. He heard the rumors, of course. Travelers would come into his shop, whispering of the new emperor of the East. They called him the Pale Tyrant. They said he had gone mad with grief. They said he had slaughtered his brothers not for power, but because he believed they had murdered his tutor. They said he was tearing apart the neighboring kingdoms, searching for something, though no one knew what. Julian felt a pang of guilt, but he suppressed it. He will get over it, Julian told himself. Asterisk, he has the Saintess now. The plot will correct itself. Asterisk. But the plot had shattered the day Julian gave a shivering boy his coat. The day they found him was a rainy Tuesday. The bell above the shop door chimed. Julian looked up from a stack of ledgers, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I'm sorry, we're Klaus." The words died in his throat. Standing in the doorway was not a customer. It was the commander of the Imperial Guard, a man Julian recognized instantly. And behind him, stepping out of the rain like a wraith, was Cashin. He was taller now, broader. His hair was longer, tied back with a black ribbon. He wore no crown, Only a travel-stained black cloak, but the aura of power around him was suffocating. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The smell of rain and ozone filled the small shop. Cassian didn't scream. He didn't rage. He simply walked forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floorboards. He stopped across the counter from Julian. He reached out, his gloved hand trembling slightly, and touched Julian's beard. "You changed your hair," Cassian whispered. His voice was wrecked, as if he hadn't used it for anything but screaming orders in years. Julian couldn't move. "Cassian, I looked for you in the river," Cassian continued, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I dragged the riverbed for 3 weeks. I made the divers go until their lungs burst. I couldn't find your body. Everyone said you were dead. They said I was mad to keep looking." "Cassian, please." Julian tried to back away, but his back hit the shelves. "I burned O'Day's border towns," Cassian said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "I told their king I would leave nothing but dust unless he allowed my inquisitors to search every village. Thousands died, Julian, because I couldn't find you." "Why?" Julian cried out, the horror crashing down on him. "Why would you do that? I'm just a tutor. I'm nobody." Cassian's hand shot out, grabbing Julian by the collar and hauling him over the counter. Books tumbled to the floor. Julian crashed against Cassian's chest, hard, armored, unyielding. "You are my soul," Cassian snarled, burying his face in Julian's neck, inhaling deeply. "You taught me to feel. You taught me to love. And then you tried to throw me away like garbage? You tried to die to escape me. I wanted you to be free," Julian argued, his hands pushing uselessly against the Emperor's shoulders. "You were supposed to be a great ruler. You were supposed to marry Alara. Alara is dead," Cassian murmured against his skin. Julian froze. "What?" "She tried to tell me to move on. She said you were a weakness." Cassian pulled back, his eyes empty of remorse. "So I removed her. I removed everyone who told me to stop looking." Julian's legs gave out. Cassian caught him easily, lifting him into his arms like a bride. "No more running. Teacher," Cassian said, turning toward the door where the guards waited with heads bowed low. "We are going home, and I am going to make sure you never, ever have the opportunity to leave my sight again." Which brought them back to the present. The golden chains, the velvet bed, the cage Julian had built with his own kindness. Cassian was unbuttoning his shirt, his movements slow and deliberate. His torso was scarred, marks of the wars he had fought to find Julian. Every scar was a guilt trip etched into skin. "You're trembling," Cassian noted, tossing his shirt aside. He crawled up the bed, looming over Julian. "I'm afraid of you," Julian admitted, tears pricking his eyes. "This isn't love, Cassian. This is madness. Is there a difference?" Cassian asked. He lowered his head, kissing the tear that tracked down Julian's temple. "I don't care what you call it. Hate me if you want. Fear me. Just don't leave me." "I can't leave you." Julian rattled the chains weakly. "You made sure of that. Good." Cassian rested his forehead against Julian's. "I tried being the good boy you wanted, Julian. I really did. But the good boy was lonely. The tyrant. The tyrant gets to keep what is his." He kissed Julian then, hard and possessive. It wasn't the kiss of a student to a teacher. It was the brand of an owner. And the terrifying thing, the thing that made Julian hate himself more than anything, was that his body responded. Years of repressed affection, of loneliness in that bookshop, of worrying about the boy he left behind. It all surged forward. Julian gasped, his mouth opening under the onslaught. Cassian groaned, a sound of pure hunger. "See," he whispered against Julian's lips. "Your body knows where it belongs. You belong to the narrative I wrote, not the one you tried to escape." "You're crazy," Julian sobbed, even as his fingers curled into Cassian's hair. "I am," Cassian agreed. "I am the monster you raised. Are you going to take responsibility, teacher?" Julian looked up into those shattered, obsessive eyes. He realized then that there was no fixing this. There was no redemption arc. He had tried to change the story, and the story had bitten back. He had saved the villain from the world, only to doom himself to the villain. "Yes," Julian whispered, surrendering to the darkness he had nurtured. "I'll take responsibility." Cassian smiled. It was the smile of the wolf who had finally caught the moon. "Good," Cassian murmured, his hand sliding down to the lock of the golden shackle, not to open it, but to check its strength. Then let us begin the rest of our lives. No interruptions. No escapes. Just us. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Cassian take absolute control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a lover who burned down a kingdom just to find you? Or is that a red flag too big to ignore? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece. Best quality. High-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style. Semi-realistic. Digital art. 2 men. BL. Yaoi. Man 1. Cassian. Emperor. Tall. Broad shoulders. Long black hair tied back. Sharp jawline. Obsidian eyes with obsessive expression. Shirtless with battle scars on torso. Leaning over. Dominant pose. Man 2. Julian. Tudor. Thinner. Delicate features. Brown hair messy on pillow. Wearing white silk sleeping shirt. Wrists shackled with golden chains to an ornate velvet headboard. Expression of fear and longing. Tears in eyes. Submissive pose. Background is a dark imperial bedroom. Candlelight. Shadows. Gold and velvet textures. Dramatic lighting. Intense atmosphere. Cinematic composition. Intricate details.